Now, one thing that should give us some perspective and pause is that all of these governments, Trump, Macron, Mertz, uh, all of them are unpopular. The publics in the United States and Europe don't want these wars. They don't want the military escalation. The latest Gallup polls show the Ukrainians want this war to end, even if it means the kinds of concessions that would end the war. This is very clear. So what we have is a class of political leaders that operate in an anachronistic way, believing in Western dominance and Western power, not understanding the changes of the world, and not following or understanding their own public opinion. So there are, I suppose, three ways that all of this can break in the end. One is that Russia can outright achieve its military objectives. This is certainly quite possible. Some would say quite probable. The other is that this escalates to a nuclear war. I think that this is absolutely possible because we are led by the most incompetent people imaginable right now, from Trump and Mertz and Macron and many others. And the third is that finally, these warmongering governments and warmongering lobbies are thrown out by publics that are completely disgusted by them. So Mertz's approval rating is at an all-time low for German chancellors. The same with the President Macron. Trump's approval rating somehow still is above 35%, but it's under 40%, and his disapproval rating is around 60%. And we have an election coming up that, if it's actually run fairly and counted fairly, is still, with all of the shenanigans going on, and there are many of them, and all of the Supreme Court rulings in Trump's favor, still likely to put the opposition into a majority in at least one of the houses of Congress. So maybe, just maybe, our very weak and seemingly failing democratic institutions could end up being a check on this quite miserable political class that we have, and that would be the peaceful way out in the end.
Yeah, I would like to see that, but it appears that the worse the war goes, the more they rely on the war. That is, when the economies of Europe gets weaker, they look towards more militarism for economic and technological development. When our leaders lose support from their public because of the war, they then use the war to crush dissent by essentially dismissing all opposition as being, some pro-Kremlin conspiracy. And also, when we see the West fragmenting, we hear that, we essentially get the message that fighting Russia is the new unifying idea. So it's, I don't see the course correction just yet, but
Right, Glenn, I think all of that is exactly right, of course, except that the public is not being pulled along. In France, with Marine Le Pen now contesting the presidency next year, that will become France's major political drama, not Ukraine. In Russia, with the AfD surging in the polls and saying that Germany needs a completely different approach based on diplomacy vis-a-vis Russia, that is a potential break. And in the United States, the overwhelming opposition of the public to Israel and what happened, the genocide in Gaza, and now to the war in Iran, is also potentially a change of direction in American politics. I grant you, none of this is simple because the deep military war machine is extremely powerful in the US and Europe. And these politicians are basically operating mouthpieces for a much deeper set of narrow interests, but quite powerful narrow interests. But I think that it is encouraging that the public does not accept this, and that means that even with all of the absolutely clear resistance of the political class, and you're completely right on it, there's nothing that's changing the dynamics within this group of politicians. But what might change it is political defeat by outside parties that are tapping into the true public opinion.
I know you have to run, so let me just ask a very quick, brief question. That is, the absence of strategy, as you said, is quite evident. But what do you think are the objectives now of the Americans and versus the Europeans in terms of, well, their main rival, as we saw at the summit, which is Russia? What is it that they actually want to achieve here? Is it simply to bring the Americans deeper into the war, or how are you reading this? Because it doesn't seem rational to push this hard for a war with the world's largest nuclear power.
We should, of course, start from the proposition that since 1945, and certainly since 1991, at the supposed end of the Cold War, the deep state or military industrial complex intention has been to weaken Russia in any opportunistic way possible, to support whatever insurgencies on Russia's periphery, to surround Russia in the Black Sea with NATO enlargement, to try to create unrest by so-called economic tools, the unilateral sanctions, the confiscation of Russia's money, and so forth. And I don't think those goals have changed in, again, the basic driver of foreign policy in the United States, the CIA, and the military contractors, and now the Palantirs and others of the world. They don't count lives, they don't count money. They are out to sell their goods, and if the U.S. goes broke in the process, that's just fine. We've created a class of warmongering billionaires that speak publicly about how important these wars by the Western world are. Um, so this is really our uh, ongoing situation, and it is the basic motivation that is either going to drive us to complete disaster, which is brewing right now, um, or to some kind of break in the politics because the public can finally is able to use the tools of democracy to make their views heard. Admittedly, that hasn't happened. And the United States, for decades, policed Western European politics to make sure that no anti-American politics could survive. And that kind of policing continues until today. But I would say most of our Western countries are in political crisis right now because of the divergence of the dominant interests, class interests of this militarized state, and the broader public opinion, which understands that this is a disaster. So I think we will continue to flounder. Don't expect anything from Trump, anything sensible, any direction that is sustained. He becomes more and more incoherent and less relevant, actually, except that he loves to dominate the media, and the media love to pay attention to every idiotic utterance of this man.
Well, Jeff, thank you so much for taking the time. And yes, I know you have a busy day there in Uzbekistan, so thanks again.
Great to be with you. Thanks.